Well, I'm getting really pissed off because over the past few days, we've seen a flood of misinformation about the Ukraine war, particularly from neocons, liberals, warmongers in Washington, D.C., who are twisting President Trump's recent comments about Ukraine, starting the war. Remember he said this the other night? Zelensky being a dictator. He said that yesterday, and he doubled down on it again today, which he is. So those two things have really made warmongers and neocons and liberals upset. These neocons, liberals, and morons desperately want the war to continue, and they desperately want you to believe Ukrainian dictator Zelensky is a hero after President Trump called him out as a dictator who cancels elections and persecutes Christians in his country. It all came to a boiling point, though, on Wednesday when President Trump said Ukraine was responsible for the start of the war. He's 100% correct, except he left out the part where the CIA played a critical role in starting the war, using Ukraine as a proxy. But nevertheless, that hasn't stopped the backlash. The backlash has been swift. Neocons like Nikki Haley posting this. These are classic Russian talking points, Nikki Haley says. Exactly what Putin wants. Of course, she absolutely wants to continue this war. She was pushing vehemently for it. Thankfully, President Trump listened to Tucker Carlson, who vehemently told him, do not make her a part of your administration. She's a warmonger. Backstabber in chief Mike Pence posted this. Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia launched an unprovoked, brutal invasion, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on the truth. Russia invades Ukraine and largest year. Anyway, so he's saying Ukraine did not start this war. And hundreds of prominent neocons, liberals, warmongers losing their minds, saying Trump is using Putin's talking points or calling him a Putin puppet like this today in the Daily Star. Look at that. Putin's poodle. Orange man baby blames here, right? Ukraine for what?
You know what they're doing here. They're thinking that if they embarrass President Trump enough, he will walk back this. I mean, it's a stupid method. It never worked, not during the first administration. But this seems one level past. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Janine Shaner in our chat says it wasn't unprovoked. Exactly, because you watch our show. You're intelligent. But there are a lot of morons out there today, and you can see them all over X. Then they want you to believe a distorted version of history, but the truth is far from different. So let's break it down. To understand the origins of this war, we need to go back to 2014. And if you want, we could even go back earlier to the expansion of NATO, Bill Clinton, 1994. But let's stick with 2014 here, okay? The year a CIA-backed coup overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected government. The Maidan protests in Kiev, which started as political unrest with paid and trained CIA terrorists and thugs, quickly escalated into violence on purpose. The CIA is very good at that, by the way, infiltrating groups, carrying out color revolutions. And on this pivotal day in Maidan Square, dozens of people killed in the square. But what was really happening behind the scenes, the Western-backed intelligence community was actively fomenting this coup using CIA-paid agitators for months.
Which we knew and were confirmed by the Victoria Nuland call that was leaked to the press, in which she actively talked about planning this. Victoria Nuland of the U.S. State Department.
Yes. So these protests were used as a pretext to install a pro-Western puppet government. Once in power, this new regime turned its sights on eastern Ukraine. It's no longer eastern Ukraine. It's now a part of Russia. But at the time, it was eastern Ukraine and Crimea, where a significant Russian-speaking population lived. Ukrainian forces launched attacks on these regions, leading to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Innocent civilians, innocent children. That's what we call a genocide. In Crimea, Russian troops were already stationed there. They were able to thwart the attack, and the Ukrainian troops that were stationed there defected to the Russian military. 80% of them did that. 80% were like, we don't want to be a part of those guys, not these guys that are trying to kill us. They had a referendum vote, by the way. And in fact, the official who held that vote was Ukrainian. And they voted to join Russia of their own free will. It was not what Barack Obama told us, an invasion of Crimea. They were already there. This was a lie, a bald-faced lie. But of course, the media runs with it, and then that propaganda gets, it proliferates, right? So Eastern Ukraine was not so lucky. In fact, they were jealous of Crimea and wondered why Russia hadn't taken control of them as well. What about us here in Donetsk, in Donbass? Time magazine was willing to cover it at the time. Look at this. Many Ukrainians want Russia to invade.
The
Time
date
magazine.
Stamp, 2014.
Yes, look at the date on the byline there.
Hello, Rob. Can I get a quick audio test from you, please?
Check, check. 1, 2. Yeah. 1, 2.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Me? Thank you. You're welcome. This is Clayton. So many Ukrainians want Russia to invade. That's what the Time magazine cover said. Many Ukrainians want Russia to invade, but Russia didn't invade. A Venezuela journalist covering this genocide long before the Ukraine war broke out explained it this way. Take a look. Venezuelan journalist in Donbass. Kiev tries to kill as many people as possible. This was before the Ukrainian war broke out that we know in the media as like the Zelensky Ukrainian war. This was well before that. This was well before that, these headlines. Venezuelan journalists who were there covering it. Ukraine tries to kill as many people as possible in their indiscriminate attacks in the Donbass. So they were doing this openly, killing children on the playground, dropping petal mines, these little petal mines that look like leaves. Great journalist Eva Bartlett has covered this extensively, where these little kids will go up because they look like leaves. And like, what is this? Oh, and they pick them up and their hands blow off. Face blows off. Killed. This was not a civil dispute. It was a targeted military campaign against ethnic Russians who resisted the new CIA-backed leadership. Even CNN, buried in its archives, reported on these attacks. But the mainstream narrative conveniently ignores this. So CNN had a whole report about this, and it's remarkable to watch. It's a little bit long, but they covered the destruction of the CIA and the Western-backed governments in Donbass.
Petro Poroshenko will have a hard time winning back hearts and minds in this city. As the people of Donetsk sweep up the debris of their homes and livelihoods, they are hardened against a president they say is killing his own people. We are Ukrainian, but they kill us, this man says. So we probably need our own country, because these people in Kiev, they are not brothers for us. The shells hit these homes days ago, but the tears are still fresh.
Или слава. 27-го, 28-го, 29-го очень сильно. Фактически мы живем в подвалах.
We live on the ground. It was so hard for 2 weeks, especially for 27, 28, 29th. But only today it's quiet.
Извините, я пойду.
Sorry, I need to go.
So meanwhile, behind the scenes, the CIA was expanding its influence, setting up multiple field offices throughout Ukraine. Even the New York Times did a deep dive in 2024 on these CIA bases throughout Ukraine. Here's the front page story in the New York Times. These intelligence hubs were coordinated ongoing operations, ensuring that the conflict remained active while relentless attacks on civilians in the Donbass region were unfolding. The goal? To provoke Russia into action, while securing Ukraine as a proxy for Western interests. Would it work? Would Putin take the bait? Well, this is where the Minsk Accords come in, of course. Agreements meant to bring peace to the region, but as former German Chancellor Angela Merkel later admitted, the West never actually intended to honor them at all. It was a joke. It was like propaganda. So Putin fell for it. And he admitted he fell for it. He thought that they actually meant to go along with that. These agreements were nothing more than a stalling tactic, a deception used to buy time while Ukraine was armed and fortified for an eventual confrontation with Russia. President Putin repeatedly urged adherence to the Minsk Accords to prevent further bloodshed. Hey, stop killing these people in eastern Ukraine. Stop killing children. Stop just bombing markets, schools, playgrounds. Wouldn't that be a good idea? But his warnings were ignored. The genocide continued, and then 2019 hit. Zelensky was a peace candidate. He vowed to end the genocide war in eastern Ukraine. He vowed to stop the killing of his own people. Sure, they spoke Russian, but they were Ukrainian. They lived there for decades. However, very quickly, After the election, Zelensky did not make good on his promise to end the war in Donbass. This was the single biggest reason he was elected in the spring of 2019. Did you know that?
Yes.
Did you, all of you watching, did you know that? He was a peace candidate. He ran on ending their genocide in eastern Ukraine. But why did he back down? Why did he back down on this? Because there are a lot of nationalist neo-Nazis in Ukraine. The largest number, in fact, of Nazis in the world live in Ukraine. Even NBC News, before the modern war broke out, openly put this in their headlines. Ukraine's Nazi problem is real.
And the Israeli government warned the U.S. State Department, we think you should help take a look at this Nazi problem in Ukraine.
So Israel was warning about the Nazi problem in Ukraine. So was the Daily Mail. So were many publications about the Nazi problem in Ukraine. Now we forget about it. We ignore it. And in fact, in Canada, they invite neo-Nazis to stand up and get applause lines in front of the Canadian Parliament, which they did under Trudeau. Anyway, Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem is real. And here in that photo, you can see the proud neo-Nazi Azov battalion that are still hugely influential, running the military in Ukraine. So Zelensky said he was going to stop the killing of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. He went to the front lines where these Nazis were carrying out this genocide, and they quickly tried to overthrow him. He quickly backed down. He tried to stare the Nazis down, basically. But he's a small man, and he was trying to tell them to stop fighting. And they told him to shut the F up, and it was all caught on camera. Watch.
О том, что демилитаризация украинских граждан, мы бы хотели это все обсудить и формализировать, чтобы потом не было как у Петра Алексеевича.
Если ты со мной хочешь формализировать отношения?
В меморандуме.
Я с тобой?
Не я с вами, а все люди, которые в этом процессе, те, которым болит за Украину.
Как капитуляция, прошу так.
Формализация.
Я пришел, тебе сказал, вы оружие вывезете, а ты меня переводишь стрелки.
Так я вам второй момент уже озвучил. Я вас услышал, вы сказали.
Ты мне вообще не можешь никакие ультиматумы озвучивать, Денис, ты не понял.
Так я вам ультиматум, я говорю, это были люди.
Нам за эти оружие забрать?
При чем здесь? Я вам говорю за второй момент.
Я не понимаю, чем мы закончим сейчас разговор.
Так мы нормально общаемся.
Ну так и давай нормально общаться.
Ну, никто же вас не пытается макнуть никуда. Вам передали то, что происходило в Украине, то, что люди еще
мне передал? Я же тебе говорю, ты мне скажи,
так я вам говорю, по Украине были акции.
Денис, по Украине вчера прошел дождь, вот что я слышу.
Ну, так я вам рассказываю о том, что происходило.
Где акции? Кто мне что передал? Говорю, давай, что ты...
Вот я вам и говорю, что люди хотят встречи с вами.
Какие люди? Нет,
которые вышли на мероприятие под...
Фамилию ты можешь мне сказать или нет? Ты что ты все время...
Ну, хотите, Плеханов, Кухарчук, ну это по разным областям.
Денис, это же так не делается.
Ну, так спросили, я передал.
Вышел стадник.
Yeah, they're all friends there, right?
Yeah.
Having conversation with Nazis, you need to stop the killing of the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. And the Nazis are like, no, sorry, we're going to keep doing that. We like doing that. So he backed down. Zelensky declared support for stopping that war in 2019. But large-scale neo-Nazi street protests led by nationalist thugs threatening to overthrow him, he quickly backed down, never returning to the issue again. And he allowed his military to continue the genocide in violation of the Minsk Accords with Russia. And now, years later, the same people who helped create this war are acting outraged to Trump for stating the obvious, that Ukraine started this conflict. The facts back him up. The war didn't begin in 2022. It began in 2014 at the latest, when the U.S. and its allies helped overthrow Ukrainians' government and turn the country into a battleground for their own geopolitical goals, provoking Putin into invading eastern Ukraine and protecting the people who were under a 10-year genocide. It's time to cut through the propaganda and tell the truth about what actually happened in Ukraine.
Well, I also take issue with this provoking Putin into invading eastern Ukraine. There is nuance there as well, because Russian parliament voted for a special military operation at the request of those regions in eastern Ukraine.
And actually, so Putin didn't want to do it.
Yes, it was not his personal pet that, I'm going to take over the world.